The afternoon sun burned low over the cracked red earth of the borderlands, turning the cliffs into walls of rust and fire. I rode along the narrow trail at their base, checking on the small herd of cows that barely kept the farm alive. The place was poor but stubborn. A single wooden house with a roof that leaked in every storm, a handful of bony cows, a deep well that never ran dry, and old Doyle, the hired hand who had worked the land longer than I had been alive. We kept to ourselves. In these parts, between human villages and orc territories, curiosity was the fastest way to die. The hatred between our peoples was older than any living man, fed by raids, burned farms, and blood spilled on both sides. I had no family left to worry about. No wife, no children, just the farm, the cows, and Ron, my stallion, the only creature of real value I owned. He was strong, sure-footed on the rocky paths, and the one thing that made the hard days bearable. I kept my head down, my mouth shut, and my gate closed. That was how a man survived out here. That day, the wind carried a different sound. Hooves, fast, desperate. I reined Ron in just as she burst into view, a young orc woman, no more than 20, running hard across the broken ground. Her leather tunic was torn and filthy, her black hair matted with dust and sweat. Her feet were bare, leaving bloody prints on the red stone. Behind her came 3 riders on horseback, crossbows already raised, short spears glinting in the dying light. They weren't trying to capture her. They rode like men hunting a wounded animal. I could have turned around. Everyone in the borderlands knew the rule. Don't get involved in orc business. Keep your head down. Keep your mouth shut. Stay alive. But then she glanced back. For one brief second, our eyes met. She wasn't begging. She gripped a sharp shard of stone in her fist like a knife, ready to fight even as she ran. There was no fear in her face, only defiance and exhaustion. Something inside me twisted. I remembered my little sister, years ago, left behind in the chaos of a raid while I hid like a coward. I had carried that guilt ever since. I didn't think. I kicked Ron forward, driving him straight between the running girl and the 3 riders. The stallion snorted in surprise but obeyed. I swung down from the saddle, boots hitting the dirt hard, and threw the reins toward her. "Go!" I said. She skidded to a stop, chest heaving, yellow eyes wide with shock and suspicion. For a heartbeat, she just stared at me, as if waiting for the trap to spring. The thunder of hooves grew louder behind us. I pointed at the saddle. "Go! Now!" She hesitated one more second, then snatched the reins, vaulted onto Ron's back with a grace that belied her exhaustion, and drove her heels into his sides. The stallion lunged forward, carrying her around the base of the cliff and out of sight in a cloud of red dust. I stood alone in the trail. The 3 riders reined in hard, horses skidding. The leader, a thick-necked man with a red beard I recognized as Brachus, glared down at me, crossbow still half raised. "You just gave your horse to an orc!" he snarled. "She needed it more than I did," I answered. Brachus's face darkened. "You've cost yourself a good horse, stranger, and you've made yourself an enemy of every honest man in these parts." I shrugged. "I've been poor and stupid before. One more time won't kill me." His companions muttered curses. Brachus stared at me a long moment, weighing whether to put a bolt through my chest right there. Finally, he spat on the ground. "This isn't over," he said. Then he wheeled his horse, and the 3 of them rode off, following the direction the orc girl had fled. I watched them go until the dust settled. Then I started the long walk home. It took nearly 2 hours on foot. My boots filled with grit, my throat burned, and every step reminded me what I had just done. When I finally reached the farm, Doyle was mending a harness by the barn. He looked up, saw me without the horse, and raised one gray eyebrow. "Where's Ron?" he asked. I told him everything. Doyle was quiet for a long time. He set the harness down and wiped his hands on his trousers. "Those bounty hunters will be back," he said at last. "I know." He studied me, then gave a small nod, as if he had expected nothing less. "If you had it to do over?" I didn't even have to think. I'd still give her the horse. That night I checked every lock, loaded the crossbow, and placed it within easy reach by the door. I lay on my narrow cot, listening to the wind move through the fence rails. Every creak made my heart jump. Yet beneath the fear, there was something strange and quiet, a kind of peace I hadn't felt in years. For the first time in a long while, I had done something I could look myself in the eye about. I thought I had lost Ron forever. I thought the orc girl was nothing more than a fleeting shadow that had crossed my path for a few seconds. I had no idea that handing over those reins would pull her entire clan, the hatred of the Borderlands, and the whole shape of my future straight to my gate. My name is Callan Rusk. And that was the day everything changed. The next 4 days passed in a strange kind of quiet. I worked the farm the way I always had, mending the northern fence where the wind had torn the rails loose, hauling water up from the deep well for the cows, patching the feed troughs, and checking for tracks around the property at dawn and dusk. My eyes kept drifting toward the red cliffs where I had last seen Ron disappear with the orc girl. Every shadow on the rocks made my stomach tighten. Doyle never mentioned the horse again, but I noticed he kept an extra crossbow loaded by the door and slept closer to the window than usual. We both waited for the other shoe to drop. On the morning of the 5th day, Doyle came running into the yard, his old voice cracking with surprise. "Callan, get out here!" I dropped the hammer I was using on a loose board and stepped outside. There, standing calm and steady in his usual stall, was Ron. My stallion looked better than when I had last seen him. His coat gleamed as if freshly brushed, his muscles moved easily under the skin, and there wasn't a single whip mark or spur wound on him. His mane had been carefully braided with a single strip of deep red cloth woven through the black hair. The color caught the early light like a warning flag. I walked slowly to the stall. Ron nickered softly and pushed his nose against my chest the way he always did when he wanted grain. He smelled of clean mountain air and crushed herbs, not of fear or hard riding. Doyle pointed toward the far fence post. "There's more." A small bundle wrapped in black cloth was tied neatly to the post with a strip of supple leather. I untied it with careful fingers. Inside lay 4 things: a new saddle strap made of finely tooled leather, strong yet soft; a small pouch of dried herbs that smelled sharply of fever break and wound clean; a single eagle feather wrapped tightly at the base with copper thread; and a flat piece of dark wood carved with simple lines. A mountain peak flowing into a narrow stream. I didn't understand every symbol, but I knew what the bundle meant. It wasn't payment, it was thanks, memory, and a quiet question all at once. I stood there for a long moment, feeling eyes on me, not hostile, not close enough to threaten, just watching from the rocky ridges beyond the fence. Someone wanted to see what I would do with their gift. I didn't shout. I didn't reach for a weapon. Instead, I carried the bundle inside, hung the new saddle strap on the wall beside my old one, placed the herb pouch on the shelf next to the medical kit, set the eagle feather upright on the table where the light would catch it, and left the carved wood next to the feather. Then I went back outside and continued my work. If they were watching, I wanted them to see respect, not fear. That afternoon, Brackus Redbeard returned with one other rider. They stopped at the edge of the yard. His eyes went straight to Ron standing in the stall, then to the red braid in the mane. His face darkened like storm clouds rolling over the cliffs. "Looks like you and the orcs are getting real friendly," he growled. "I gave a horse to a girl who was being hunted like an animal," I said evenly. "She brought him back, that's all." Brackus leaned forward in the saddle. "In this land, helping an orc makes you an enemy of every honest man." "If honest men mean standing by while the weak are chased down like game," I answered, "then I don't want that kind of honesty." His companion shifted uncomfortably. Brackus's hand tightened on the hilt of his sword, but he didn't draw it. Not yet. "Next time we come," he said, voice low and ugly, "we won't be talking." They wheeled their horses and rode away. I watched the dust settle and felt the weight of the warning settle heavier than before. Doyle stepped out of the shadows near the barn, crossbow still in his hands. "They're scared," he muttered, "not just angry, scared that one small kindness might open a door they want kept shut." That night, I went out to check the gate before turning in. The moon was thin, and the wind carried the scent of pine from the high ridges. A figure stood just beyond the fence line, silent, still, outlined against the dark rocks. It was her, the orc girl. She carried no visible weapons and made no move to enter. She simply stood there, waiting. I walked to the fence but stopped on my side. For a long moment neither of us spoke. Then she said in broken common, the words careful and thick with her accent, "Your horse is strong. I returned him. "You kept him alive," I answered. "I thank you for that." She looked at me for what felt like a long time, yellow eyes catching the moonlight. Then she spoke again, softer this time. "My name is Saira Gray Mountain." I nodded. "Callan Rusk." She held my gaze a heartbeat longer, then turned and melted into the shadows between the rocks. One moment she was there, the next she was gone. I stood at the fence a while longer, the night air cool on my skin. The name stayed with me long after the sound of her footsteps faded. She was no longer just the orc girl who had run for her life across the red stone. She had a name. She had honor, and she had come back, on foot and alone, to return what she could have kept forever. I didn't know it then, but that quiet exchange at the fence was only the beginning. A few days later, the morning air carried the sharp chill of the high ridges. I was sharpening a hoe near the barn when Doyle's voice came low and urgent from the doorway. "Callan, company at the fence, 7 of them, on horseback." I set the hoe down and walked out, wiping my hands on my trousers. Beyond the wooden rails stood 7 orc riders, silent in the pale dawn light. They carried no drawn weapons, no battle line. They simply waited. Saira sat tall on Ron, the red braid still woven through his mane. Beside her was a broad-shouldered orc with silver-threaded hair pulled back tightly, his back straight as an old spear. His eyes were calm, measuring everything without hurry. I recognized the authority in him before Saira even spoke. The group made no move to enter. They simply watched as I approached the gate. Saira's yellow eyes met mine for a brief moment, then she turned to the older orc and spoke quietly in their tongue. He answered in a low rumble, and she translated, her comment still careful but clearer than before. "My father is Kurag Gray Mountain," she said. "He leads our band in the hidden valleys. He says you gave his daughter a horse when no one was watching. You asked for no price. When the hunters came, you did not deny what you had done. He wants to know if that was your true nature, or only one foolish moment." I looked at Kurag directly. He did not blink. "I try to live right," I answered. "I don't always manage it. But that day, I did." Saira translated. Kurag listened, then gave one slow nod, as if my words had weight he was testing. I lifted the gate latch. "You're welcome inside." No one moved at first. Then Kurag swung down from his horse with the deliberate care of a man who understood that accepting an invitation was itself a ritual. The others followed. Doyle brought out a bucket of cool well water and a basket of hard bread. The orcs drank from the wooden cups without hesitation. They looked over the farm the way a smith looks at iron, noting the hand-mended rails, the clean stalls, the way the cows stood quietly at the trough, the water that never ran low. I felt them reading my life through every small thing I had kept standing. We sat on overturned crates and the edge of the water trough. There were no grand oaths or long speeches. We talked about real things, which springs still ran clean after the dry season, where Brockus and his riders liked to patrol, which old trails through the cliffs were still safe, and which had been turned into traps. Kurag spoke of the mountain paths his people used to move unseen. I told him which meadows my cows could graze without drawing attention from the bounty hunters. No promises were made, yet something settled between us, an understanding that if I did not betray them, they would not let the hunters use my land as a killing ground. Saira sat between us, translating every line. Sometimes she paused to find the right word, her brow creasing with concentration. She never softened her voice or lowered her eyes. When I asked if her feet had healed from that desperate run, she only answered, "They are fine now." But I noticed the fresh pink scars beneath her ankle and quietly fetched the pouch of herbs she had left me, along with a jar of thick salve I kept for cracked skin and rope burns. I held them out to her. "For the new cuts." She frowned. "I already repaid the debt." "This isn't repayment," I said. "A foot that hurts needs medicine, that's all." She stared at the jar a long moment, then took it. Kurag watched us without expression, but I felt the weight of his gaze shift, as if something small had been decided. When they left, the yard felt strangely empty. That evening and the days that followed, signs began appearing around the farm. Fresh hoofprints just outside the fence line, never crossing in. Old game traps that had menaced the northern pasture were dismantled and left in neat piles. A small sack of dried mountain seeds appeared beside the well one morning, and sometimes, when strangers rode too close along the ridge road, a low whistle would drift down from the rocks, first from the north, then answered from the east. The sound was never loud enough to alarm, only enough to warn. The land around my farm no longer felt entirely mine alone. That same night, long after Doyle had gone to bed, I stepped outside to check the gate one last time. A single figure waited beyond the rails. Sarah. She carried nothing but a thin strip of supple leather in her hands. When I approached, she held it up. "For Ron," she said. "A better throat strap. The old one was wearing thin." I took the leather. It was soft, beautifully worked, the edges tooled with a simple repeating pattern of running water. She reached through the bars and, with quick, sure fingers, fastened it to the stallion's halter, where he stood dozing by the fence. Ron snorted softly, pleased. I watched her work. "You're not afraid to come here alone?" She finished the knot, then looked up at me through the darkness. "Fear is not a reason to refuse what is right." The words struck me harder than any blow. They were almost exactly what I had felt the moment I threw her the reins on that red cliff trail. For the first time, I realized something deeper than gratitude had begun to grow between us. Something quieter, stronger, and far more dangerous than either of us had asked for. Sarah stepped back into the shadows. A moment later she was gone, swallowed by the night as silently as she had come. I stood at the fence a long while, the new leather strap warm in my hand, listening to the quiet breathing of the farm and the faint wind moving over the distant cliffs. I had thought I was only returning a horse that day. I was beginning to understand I had opened something I could never close again. The rainy season arrived quietly at first, turning the red dust into mud and greening the pastures in long, slow waves. The cows grew sleek again. I hired 2 more hands to help repair the northern fence and dig an extra cistern so we would not run short when the dry months returned. For the first time in years, the farm felt almost stable. Sarah began coming more often. She would appear at the fence in the middle of the day now, never hiding. Sometimes she carried bundles of mountain herbs to trade for salt and a little flour. Sometimes she simply sat on the edge of the water trough, asking questions about Ron's gait or how I mended a cracked harness. I showed her how to oil leather so it would not stiffen in the rain. She showed me the faint lines of clouds on the high cliffs that meant a storm would break before nightfall. Each visit lasted longer than the last. We spoke in short, careful sentences, learning the shape of each other's silences. When she left, the yard always felt quieter than it should. Then the warning came. A shepherd boy I sometimes traded with ran into the yard one afternoon breathing hard. "Brachus has gathered 6 riders," he panted. "They're asking every traveler where your farm lies. They're not hiding it." Doyle looked at me across the barn door. "This time they won't come to talk." I spent the rest of the day preparing. We moved the young calves behind the stone shed where they could not be seen from the road. I loaded every crossbow and placed them where they could be reached quickly. I filled buckets with water in case they tried to burn the barn. I did not send word to anyone. There was no one to send it to. That night, as the rain drummed softly on the roof, a low whistle drifted down from the northern ridge. A second whistle answered from the east. I stood at the window and listened. The sound was not loud, but it was deliberate. Kurug's people had seen. The attack came at dusk the following evening. I was standing on the porch when they broke through the fence. 7 riders, Brachus at their head, drove their horses straight across the yard, splintering rails as they came. Brachus reined in hard, his red beard bright against the gray sky. "No orc girl to hide behind this time," he called, smiling, like a man who had already won. "Today we settle accounts." I kept my crossbow lowered, but ready. "This is my land. Turn around and leave." His riders fanned out, 2 of them already circling toward the barn where the calves were hidden. I saw the torches they carried. They meant to burn what they could not steal. Before the first torch could be lit, the whistles came again, 3 directions at once. The horses of Brachus's men shied violently, ears pinned, eyes rolling white. From the rocky slopes that bordered the farm, dark shapes appeared along the ridge lines. Not close enough to fight, but close enough to be seen. Bows were not drawn, but the message was unmistakable. Brachus's smile faltered. Then Saira rode out of the gathering shadows on Ron, stopping just beyond the broken fence. Rain glistened on her dark hair and the red braid still woven in the stallion's mane. She looked straight at Brachus and spoke in clear, steady common. "This man saved my life when no one else would. He stood right when you stood wrong," Brachus spat. "You're the prey that got away. Nothing more." I stepped down from the porch. "She is not prey." Brachus reached for his sword. At the same instant, Kurag appeared behind him, silent as stone, the point of a long spear resting lightly against the flank of Brachus's horse. The older orc did not raise his voice. He simply waited. Sarah translated, her tone flat and final. "If you hunt on this land again, you will not find the road home." For a long, ugly moment, no one moved. Rain hissed on the torches. Then one of Brachus's men turned his horse and rode back through the gap in the fence. Another followed. Then another. Brachus sat alone for a heartbeat longer, hatred burning in his eyes, before he jerked his mount around and followed them. The sound of their hooves faded into the rain. The yard grew still. Sarah walked Ron forward until she reached me. She slid down and held out the reins. "I rode him here," she said quietly. "This time, I was not running." I took the reins. Our fingers brushed for the briefest second. I understood the difference at once. The first time she had taken Ron to survive. This time she had come because she chose to stand beside me. That night Kurag and 4 of his warriors stayed. We built a fire outside under the wide overhang of the barn roof and shared what little meat and bread we had. No one spoke of oaths or alliances. We simply sat together while the rain fell and the fire hissed. When they left before dawn, the broken fence had already been dragged back into place and lashed with fresh rope. From that evening onward, the farm was no longer a lonely place at the edge of the world. The small kindness I had offered on a Red Cliff trail had returned as something larger and quieter than I had ever expected. A circle of protection I had not asked for, but could no longer live without. After the day Brachus and his riders were driven from the farm, Saira began coming openly. No more shadows at the fence under cover of night. She rode up in the middle of the day on whatever mountain pony her people lent her, sometimes on Ron when I let her borrow him. She would sit on the edge of the porch with a cup of cool well water, talking quietly with Doyle about the cows or the best way to mend a cracked harness. Her smiles were still rare, but when they came, they reached her eyes, turning the hard yellow into something warmer like sunlight on stone. She asked questions no one had ever asked me. How did I decide which calves to keep and which to sell? Why did I let the hired hands eat at the same table instead of sending them to the barn? What made a farm feel like a home instead of just a place to survive? In turn, I asked her about the hidden valleys where her band lived, about the old rituals for braiding a horse's mane before a long journey, about the meaning of the eagle feather she had once left me. We spoke in short sentences at first, then longer ones, learning the shape of each other's days the way 2 people learn a new trail together. One late afternoon, we brought a pair of stray cows down from the high pasture. Sarah rode Ron with the easy confidence of someone born to the saddle. She guided him with her knees and a loose rope, cutting off the cows before they could double back. When she slid down beside me, the wind caught her black hair and lifted it across her shoulder. Dust and sunlight clung to her green skin, and for a moment the whole world narrowed to that single sight. I realized I had been listening for the sound of her horse every morning. I realized I counted the hours until she might appear at the fence. I realized I did not want her to leave when the sun dipped behind the cliffs. I loved her. I did not want to hide it like some guilty secret. A few days later, I rode out at first light to the edge of the mountains where Kurag's band sometimes camped. I carried salt, a pouch of horse liniment, and the supple leather straps Saira had once given Ron. When I found them, Saira stepped forward to translate. I looked straight at her father. "I respect your daughter," I said. "If she chooses, I want to court her as a life partner. Not because she owes me anything. The debt was paid the day Ron came home." Kurag studied me for a long time, the way a man studies a strange trail before stepping onto it. Through Saira, he asked, "Do you want her because she owes you a life?" "No," I answered. "If she owed me, that debt was settled when the horse returned. I want her because she is Saira Gray Mountain. That is enough." Sarah translated my words. When she finished, she turned her face slightly away, but I saw the tips of her ears darken with color. Kurag did not speak for several heartbeats. Then he said simply, "My daughter chooses for herself." Sarah looked at me then, steady and unafraid. "If I come to your farm, what will your people say?" "Some will speak badly of it," I told her. "They always do. But we will live truthfully until their words grow tired and fall away." A small smile touched her mouth. "You speak like a man who has been called a fool before." "I have experience," I said. She laughed once, soft and surprised, and the sound stayed with me all the way home. The binding ceremony was not held in any human village or deep in the Orc valleys. We chose the open ground between my farm and the first cleft of the mountains, a stretch of red earth and green grass where both sides could stand without crossing into the other's territory. Doyle and my 2 hired hands came. Kurag brought Saira's foster mother and 4 of his warriors. No priest spoke grand words, no banners flew. We simply stood together under the open sky. I gave Saira a new set of reins I had made myself during the long nights, the leather tooled with simple running horses. She gave me a wide band of soft hide carved with the image of a mountain stream flowing into an open gate. Kurag stepped forward and spoke through his daughter. "One horse opened a path that day on the red cliffs. May the 2 of you keep that path from ever closing again." That was all. Saira did not become a farmer's wife in the way the village stories imagined. She remained herself, strong, quiet, proud. She became the bridge. She helped her people trade mountain herbs and furs for salt and iron tools. She taught my men how to read the faint lines of clouds on the cliffs that warned of coming storms. She showed me how to ride with lighter hands so the horse trusted instead of feared. In turn, I taught her how to keep accounts when we sold cattle at the border market, how to bargain without losing dignity, how to mend a fence so it would stand through the worst winter. The farm slowly changed. Travelers from both sides began to stop at the gate without reaching for weapons. Orcs and humans sat at the same long table under the barn roof on market days, sharing bread in silence and the occasional careful word. It was not perfect. Old hatred still muttered in the distance. Some villagers still spat when they saw Saira beside me. Some orcs still eyed me with suspicion, but the hatred no longer ruled the land around us. Years have passed since I first let an orc girl take my only horse. Ron is older now, his muzzle gray, but he still carries the faded red braid in his mane as a mark of how everything began. When strangers ask why an orc woman walks beside a human farmer on this lonely stretch of borderland, I only smile and say the same thing every time. I once gave a girl my horse when she needed it more than I did. She brought him back and gave me far more than I ever lost. Sarah stands next to me when I say it. She does not speak, but her hand finds mine and squeezes once, quietly, the way she has done since the day she chose to stay. The story did not begin with grand promises or ancient magic. It began with one simple decision on a red cliff trail. I opened my hand and let the reins go. Because of that single moment, I opened a gate I have never wanted to close again. I found a woman who makes me want to keep every gate open for the rest of my life.